slowing down and pattern recognition. And I kind of likened this to like Neo in the Matrix. And flash forward a number of years, and I was in a job that I really didn't enjoy any longer and felt like I didn't like it anymore. Um, I loved it initially, but sometimes some things just not forever. It starts from a place of like a positive place. It just takes itself too far in the other direction. And now it's become something you almost have to protect yourself from, right? You have to
Yeah.
kind of arm yourself with these little tools to try to make sure you're, fending it off.
Hey, the Warriors. As we mentioned last week, we are doing a new format where we're going to be interviewing coaches to help you level up in life. And so today we have Rachel Bailey Gaddis. And I'm going to ask you, Rachel, to introduce yourself.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody. I'm Rachel Gaddis. I'm a career passion coach. I help high performing professionals figure out what it is they really want to do and how to make it happen.
Awesome. All right, cool. So we'll just jump in some of the questions and we'll go from there.
Excellent.
All right. So could you share your journey as a high performance career coach? How did you discover your passion for helping burned out professionals find happiness at work?
Yeah, I've had a ton of different jobs and careers over the years. And actually, I started doing this thing where, in my free time, kind of off the side of my desk, where I'd meet someone who was trying to break into tech, where I spent a number of years working, or into consulting, where I also worked for a while, or really into any field where I was either working or had connections or, whatever. Um, and, the person maybe felt like it wasn't possible or they felt like they didn't know how to do it. Um, and I just had a real interest in helping people with that. I always hated hearing people put themselves down. So I would just help them network or adjust their resume or do a skills gap analysis or, just those little things that kind of help you segue from one career into another, whether they're close together or really far apart. And honestly, I really enjoyed the challenge more when it was something that was really far apart. I really liked the ones that seemed like you couldn't do it and then it was totally possible. Um, so I really found that rewarding. Flash forward a number of years, and I was in a job that I really didn't enjoy any longer and felt like I didn't like it anymore. Um, I loved it initially, but sometimes some things just not forever. Um, but I was too burned out to really think about what I was going to do next. Um, and I could have used someone like me right about then, honestly, to help me kind of figure out that part of the process. But instead, I had to spend a lot of time recovering from burnout before I could really tackle that question of what to do next. And not everyone can take that kind of time. Most people can't. They really need to keep moving, keep bringing in income. So, yeah, essentially, I want to help people who are in the position that I was in, right? Where you're working a job, you really don't know that you can stay in it another week or another month, but uh, you're too burned out to really look at your options.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I feel like it's true that sometimes we're just so much in the hamster wheel of things that like we never get the time to actually like self-reflect and figure out what it is that we really want.
Yeah, it's really hard to take that moment when you're, especially if your job is, that's why high performing professionals are kind of my niche because I feel like when you've been putting everything you've got into that job, you've put everything you have into it. You don't have anything left for yourself. So.
Awesome. So many of our viewers are looking to level up in the game of life. How can they apply some of the same mindsets to their careers?
Oh man, I really love this question, Tony, because it's such an interesting one. And I feel like what you really have to do is get super clear on what you want, whether that's to be a managing VP of your organization or to create and sell your own software company, start a nonprofit to help veterans enter the job market, whatever it is that you want to do, you have to get super, super clear on that first. And once you know what you really want and you pictured it, you can see it, it's just a matter of deciding, kind of plotting out your steps, right, from where you are to where you want to go. Like, do you need to get certain degrees? Do you need to meet certain people? Do you need to learn particular skills? And one of the ways that I've advised people to do that is look around, right, at the people that are doing what you want to do or who are close to what you want to be doing, who are similar to that, and kind of, observe them, look at what skills they have. Maybe they aren't hard skills. Maybe they're more like soft skills. Conduct your own gap analysis, right? See what you've got, what you're missing. What tools you might need in your little bag that you're like carrying through the forest, right? And how might you start filling those in?
That's awesome. So it's almost like reverse engineering where you want to be.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome. So what would you say what's like the hero's journey in career transformation?
Yeah, this is an interesting one too, because it's kind of multi-phased. I mean, before even coming to me, my clients have already taken an important step. Uh, they've already completed a transformation on their hero's journey, right? Because they've decided to make that change and they've decided to invest in themselves and in their future enough to even talk to me about it. So that alone is a big step. I mean, um, so that's the first thing I would say, and that kind of happens before they even talk to me. And then the next thing is to look back down the road, right? Thinking about that hero's journey, right? So you look back down the road to see where have I been? And not just to look, but to understand, right? To really see and like think about it and understand it. And that kind of look back, that analysis, that results in some change all by itself a lot of times. The insight that people get from that type of retrospection, even if you don't get any further, just doing that can often change your outlook just by itself, which is kind of amazing. And then the next thing is to look ahead, right? So you look back. Now you're looking ahead and you want to orient yourself. Like, okay, where am I? Where do I want to go? Like, do I want to go this way? Do I want to go that way? Um, Kind of, figuring out what you value, what are your strengths and abilities, what do you like, what do you not like, what do you care about, analogous to like the hero in the forest, it would be like, do I want the forest path? Do I want the mountain path? Do I want the path with lots of berries? Do I want the path with lots of hunting? You have to figure out what you like. And then the next thing is to choose a path or make one. And that's kind of different too, right? Kind of hacking your way through with a machete is different than if you follow the well-paved, road. And this marks a big transformative moment as well, something that requires that the client have put in some work. And I think we're going to talk about that later in the interview, but that's a big moment. And then the last thing is taking those first few steps down the path that you've decided on. And that's another big moment because you and I both know, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners do as well, that it's one thing to think about something and it's a whole other thing to actually do it.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like that a lot of the times there's a big gap between like thinking about something that you want to do and then actually taking the actions to do it. It's like you got to get past that like uncomfortable zone to be like, oh, I got to get used to being uncomfortable because if you keep doing the same thing you're doing, you're going to get the same results you've been getting, right?
Oh man, that's exactly it. That's exactly it.
That's awesome. So you mentioned clients with misaligned values, right? So how do you guide them through this self-reflection process? Like what signs indicate that someone's personal values clash with their work environment?
I love this question too, Tony. You ask a lot of great questions, but this one was cool. I find that one of the first signs can often be like a feeling of pain, a feeling of unhappiness. And what I see often is that stems from somebody who's trying to satisfy their workplace's values, which you don't agree with, while also trying to not completely betray your own personal values. And like, when you work at a place that is diametrically opposed to your own personal values, that can become nearly impossible. And you find yourself sort of trying to twist into a pretzel, trying to accommodate both yourself and your employer, and you can't do both. And that's when That's where the pain comes in and the unhappiness. And sometimes people don't realize why they feel that way. They just feel like they can't do the thing that they want to do. And sometimes that thing that they want to do is what I just described, which is not even possible.
Right.
So,
No, it's an interesting point because a lot of I guess this goes back to like the hamster wheel, right? Like when we're in the hamster wheel,
yeah,
we're not noticing these things that maybe internally is telling us like, hey, maybe like
exactly.
this is something that I want to do.
Exactly. And, that values thing where your own personal values and your employer's values don't match, that often doesn't get talked about. I mean, your workplace certainly isn't talking about it, And
Yeah.
so I think sometimes that mismatch and the pain that it causes us, that sometimes when you're talking to a coach about it, that's the first time maybe that somebody's run into that concept. And they have this kind of aha moment where they're like, that explains it. Thank you for even seeing that that was happening, right? You just feel seen and understood, and that's important.
Yeah, I think that like that's why like coaches like you are so valuable is because you get like that outside perspective. When you're too close to something, you don't see it, right? Like so sometimes you need
Exactly.
that outside perspective to be like, hey, you ever thought about this? Like, oh, like no,
Yeah.
like you don't know
Yeah.
what you don't know, right? Like so,
Totally. Totally. And we learn all the time.
yep. Awesome. Um, so let's talk about confidence now. So how do you bolster your clients' instincts and empower them to take steps toward their dreams? Are any superhero worthy techniques?
Oh, this is another great question. I love that. Um, And this is a huge part of what I like to help clients with because I love to have them. I mean, I don't love it when they come in not feeling great, but I love to see them leave a session feeling fantastic and excited and they can't wait to do the thing that they're doing. So, one of the main ways that I help clients with this is just by listening, right? And how many superheroes can we think of that have like that supersonic, hearing ability, right? And
Yep.
this is huge. A great example that happens a lot is that maybe a client comes to me and they're describing a problem that they have or several options that they're trying to choose between or whatever, right? And so they outline a couple of options and I'm listening to them. I'm listening to how their voice sounds. I'm looking at their body language and their voice sounds kind of flat. Their body language is kind of like this, or maybe their shoulders are up around their ears. They're kind of like you can just tell, right, that they're closed off, they're
Yeah.
not excited. And then they start describing that last option, the option maybe they almost didn't even tell me about, right?
Right.
But because I was listening and I waited a long, long time after they described the first two options, they eventually did tell me about the third option. And that's another thing that you find coaches doing. Um, and then they start describing that option, and it's like you're seeing a whole new side of them. Their face is smiling, they're leaning forward, their body language opens up, their shoulders kind of drop, and they're sitting up. And it's like, I mean, the whole energy changes. And I mean, you can just tell, like, this is the one they really want to do. This is the one they're excited about. And so, as their coach, one of my jobs is to help listen and observe really carefully and then show them what I observed, like tell them. So, like, after all of that, I might say back to them, here's what I heard and saw when you were describing those options to me. Like, how does that grab you? And it's amazing the reaction you get just from doing that. A client will say they won't have realized consciously that that's how they felt, but when it's reflected back to them, all of a sudden it's like a light goes on and they go, yeah, wow. Not just how I felt inside, but I didn't know it could be seen on the outside. And they feel really seen and heard. And I mean, we know that's important.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting that like our like we can't our body doesn't betray like our inner feelings, right? Like we can try to hide like the way we feel about something, but then like you can
Yeah.
tell by the body, like the body like
The
but
body always tells, right?
yeah,
It always tells.
it's so fascinating. And the other
Yeah.
point to that like you mentioned too is like sometimes it's buried deep within what we really want to do is and it's because
Mhm.
under layers and layers of like social conditioning and all these other things that
Yeah, yeah,
just keep it
stuff
down.
somebody told you when you were 6. I was on somebody's podcast recently talking about how sometimes one of those self-limiting beliefs that you might have is something you heard ages ago, years ago. You don't even remember the person telling you, but they told you something and it stuck with you and you still believe it now. Like, I'm not a creative person, or I'm not good at this, or I'm not good at that. And you just have let this be a low ceiling on that part of your life ever since. And so you don't pursue things that maybe you're empirically great at. Like everybody keeps telling you you're great at this thing. So yeah, it's definitely that stuff is there. It lurks
Awesome.
under the water, so to speak.
Yeah. It's like the iceberg, right? Like you see the picture of the iceberg, you only see tip of it, but underneath it's like this huge thing.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah. Oh, and one other thing I do to help bolster confidence is slowing down and pattern recognition. And I kind of liken this to like Neo in the Matrix. That one thing I sort of help clients to do is to zoom out a bit, slow things down a bit, and kind of find the patterns so that they can better understand what behaviors or patterns they may unknowingly be repeating. And just knowing about it can help empower them to make a different decision, which is that's huge. Just knowledge, it's power, right?
yeah. That's so interesting too, because when you think about patterns, right? It's like that that's almost like proof of programming that we have like inside of ourselves. It's like because we keep having these same outputs, but we don't realize it's because we're putting the same inputs in, right? So
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
crazy.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, so for those feeling terrible due to work-related factors like schedules or commutes, how can they address these underpinnings? Are there side quests they can explore to improve their work-life balance?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I feel this pain so hard because I have felt it. I know many people out there who are feeling it, especially when we went from working remotely, right, to a lot of people being called back into the office now. And so a lot of the things that were working great about your life all of a sudden are broken now, right? So that kid pick up and kid drop off that you and your spouse were doing, all of a sudden all of that's like broken now. And there are 1,000 examples like that. So yeah, 100%. Some of the things we've already talked about, like the values, exploring what your own values are and what really matters to you. Um, and figuring out like, are you reaching that breaking point? Because if you are, it's better to know so you can start planning for it rather than like suddenly reach quit one day in the middle of June when, all of a sudden you don't have any energy left for job searching. Um, and then another thing is that kind of what's that other thing we already talked about? The My mind just went blank on it.
Oh, good.
It was the
That's fine. It happens.
but yeah, I mean, I think that one of the side quests that people can do is
Mhm.
they can think about what they would really like their day to look like, what they would really like their week to look like, and kind of design a different outcome for themselves.
Mm.
Sometimes that doesn't fix everything that's broken about their week or their day right now, but it can help to kind of, set your sight on something down the road, right? That might help you plot out your path to get you from here to there. So those little side quests that you mentioned, they may vary from person to person. Like an example of a side quest might be um, that you might be starting to carve out a little time, uh, at the beginning of the day for this thing that you really need to fit in, or a little bit of time in the afternoon for this thing that you need to fit in. Like it might be different for each person. I don't know if I really helped, but
No, yeah, definitely. I I think it's interesting to it like it does go back to the energy piece, right? Where it's like if you're so burned out that you don't have the energy to even change your situation, like that's a problem. So like you said,
Yeah,
if you were to plan ahead of time, knowing that you're going to reach that point, you at least have that gap of time to say like, oh, I have a little bit of energy left. Let me put this into changing my situation. So I think that like that's a
exactly.
great point.
Yeah. Yeah. It's important to start to like recognize early and start trying to change your situation before you get to that breaking point. I mean, that's probably one of the top things that I've noticed with people that I work with.
And then the other point I liked is you talked about like creating that idea of like what your perfect day is, right? It's like that vision, that North Star for you to be like, okay, this is like a goal that
Yes.
I'm going after.
Yeah. And, one of the funny things is that can really sustain you. Sometimes people feel like, oh, it's a pipe dream. That's not practical. I don't want to waste time on that. Tell me practical things I can do. But creating that vision and, like you said, that North Star, that can really sustain you through a lot of the really hard work that you're going to have to do between now and actually getting there. So having that visualization that you can picture to remind you, why are you doing all this hard work? That's important.
That's awesome. So, how do you help clients navigate like ethical challenges in their careers? Any actionable advice?
Yeah, I mean, this comes right back to the notion of your own personal values and how sometimes they come into conflict with your workplace's values. I mean, not every ethical challenge is an example of this. Sometimes the ethical challenges are really obvious, right? But when
Mhm.
somebody's like wrestling with something, it's usually because of some kind of thing where they're kind of rubbing up against each other and not in a pleasant way.
Right.
So each person has to decide for themselves, right? What are your personal values? What's really most important to you? And I don't judge. I mean,
Yeah.
this is such a personal decision. But I do have tools that I use to help clients to understand this better about themselves. And if you search online, there's like 1,000 different, inventories or worksheets or quizzes, also that you can use if you want to just kind of try a DIY approach instead of going the route of a coach. um, but there are a lot of ways that you can, or even just looking at a list, right? There are a list of example values. If, me saying the word values isn't bringing anything to mind to you, and you're like, what are Vinny and Rachel talking about? Um, there are plenty of lists online, but that helps you to articulate like what the problem is, right, between
Right.
you and your workplace, or what the problem is when you're running into this kind of an internal disagreement, right, with something that you're being asked to do that you're not sure if you should do. And a lot of times, just knowing about it, just putting it on paper, that can really help you understand why you're feeling that way. And just that, and it's going to sound crazy, but just that can help clarify for you what to do about it. Because as soon as you really know and can articulate it, you're like, oh, now I get it. Now that I know exactly what the problem. And people are. And this happens so often that people are like, "Oh, okay. Well, then this is what I'm going to do." And I'm like, "Great. I'm glad you know because I wouldn't know what to tell you."
Yeah, and I think that's so interesting too, right? Because like the benefit of having a coach too is to almost like prompt you to look within. And so when you're writing things down, you start realizing like, oh, these answers are actually within me. It's but it you sometimes need that coach to be there to prompt you in a way. It's almost like Chat GPT, right? Like if you don't give Chat GPT the right
Yeah,
prompts, it's not going to give you the
it's
right
true.
answer.
It's true. Yeah, we're like Chat GPT for your internal whatever.
Yeah.
So funny. I like that.
um so imagine our listeners as protagonists in their own stories, right? What's the first step they should take to rewrite their career narrative?
Yeah, I really liked this because I do feel like so much of life, right? Of the difference between really hating your life and really having a great life. It can be in how you tell the story of your life to yourself, right? And so I thought this was such an insightful question. Um, and I do think that the first thing you have to do is look back and say, okay, what am I looking at? Where was I? And really try to understand that, because like as the protagonist in the story, right, you don't want to be repeating chapters.
Right.
You don't want to be like, okay, well, we were in chapter 4 and now we're just going to do chapter 2 again, because that story sucks. And you don't want to be retreading previous ground either. You don't want to be like, wait, we already crossed this mountain, but what's happening? And so the way I do this with clients, and everybody's got their thing, but I do this with clients via like a 1-hour job history review, where we just take a holistic view of their current and past jobs and commonalities and differences between them. And this makes it a lot easier for people to see patterns emerging. And often, a client will feel like they're stuck in a loop when they come to me, career-wise. And there is almost always an aha moment during that job history review where they'll kind of understand for the first time why they've been stuck in that loop, right? And that understanding, as you know, is the first step toward getting out of it. So, yeah, I mean, to me, that first step in rewriting your career narrative is that kind of look back down the road and understanding where you were.
That's awesome. Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. Like it's going back to look at the pattern recognition, like you mentioned before. It's like, oh, these are the patterns. This is why I'm getting the same result, and it's because you start recognizing, oh, these are the same inputs I've been putting into it.
Yeah. You are such a computer guy. I can tell. I mean, that's how you're able to stop looking back or down at where your feet are stuck in the mud, right? And how you can start looking forward at the road ahead and actually get somewhere. Because, I mean, seeing stuff, that's new fun.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. So speaking of alignment, right? So how do you guide clients towards roles that align with their true selves? Are there any hidden treasure maps that they can follow?
I just love this metaphor. I know you can tell I'm going to love stuff before you finish the question. So first of all, I don't really guide my clients toward roles. They kind of guide themselves, as I'm sure you know. I just kind of help my clients to better understand certain things about themselves, like their values and all that stuff we've already talked about. And then as the client and I kind of assemble that picture and it comes into focus better, they get a better idea of what their true self is at this moment and what they really want out of work at this moment. And as that comes into focus, they're in a much better position to move towards something that they really want. Because they might be in a job that they really wanted 20 years ago.
Right.
It's just that they're not the same person they were 20 years ago.
Yep.
And their feelings about their job reflect that. So the hidden treasure map here would be that picture of the client's true self, right? And what they really want out of work, which is, that treasure map is what we assemble together through that combination of tools and one-on-one discussion and sessions.
That's awesome. And it's interesting that you say like how we change over time, right? Because like even scientifically, all of our cells are completely different cells within 7 years.
Yeah.
So like just think about that.
You are a completely new person. Your brain, like all of it.
Yeah.
I love that you said that. It is so true.
Yeah. So I think like a good thing to think about is like what you like now and what you feel like you want now might change over time, and that's completely okay. Like
it's completely normal.
Yeah.
It's to be expected. Like, I feel like in this day and age, as fast as technology changes and will be changing in the future, like faster and faster, it's to be expected.
Yeah.
Expect, like if you were graduating from college 10 years ago, like expect to have your career changing and changing and changing, because tech is like, forget about it. We can't even picture where it's going to be in 15 years. And that's okay. I mean, we're going to enjoy the progress, but it means that we're going to have to adapt career-wise.
Yeah, definitely. Like even if you look back in human history, right? Like every time there's a major invention, we were all, riding horses before cars came along. And now, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
So things are inevitably going to change. Like the only constant in life is change, right? So like
I say that a lot to myself and to other people.
So I think like that's a great point to take away. So let's explore the negative thought patterns or limiting beliefs, right? So how can our listeners defeat these mental foes and reclaim their joy at work?
Yeah, this is a huge one, and it pops up in a lot of different ways too. So, the first thing, of course, is to just even become aware of those negative thought patterns that you might have, like limiting beliefs, gremlins, whatever you want to call them, because you have to you can't stop them unless you're aware of them in the first place. And becoming aware of it can be really tricky. I mean, that's where a coach or somebody can be super helpful. But if you're one of the fortunate self-aware, if you're already aware of when you're falling into negative thought patterns or limiting beliefs, fantastic. If not, here are a few clues that I kind of jotted down, trying to think about how you might know. I thought they did something like, well, I could do XYZ, kind of rising excitement, like a positive, fun, cool thing. But, and the part after but would be the negative thought pattern or limiting beliefs. So that's one clue. This is especially true if the thought comes up a lot, like quite often. And then another clue would be a thought that goes something like, and this would be a thought about yourself, that goes something like, man, I wish such and such weren't true, or I wish I weren't like, this, or I wish I didn't have this quality. That type of thought is often a sign of a limiting belief, especially if you're thinking that same thought about yourself often. You should really drag that out into the light and take a look. Like, do you have evidence to support that? Is that something other people say to you? Is that something you can show examples of in your life, or is that just the thing you've been saying to yourself for so long that you've come to just make it part of your daily rhetoric? Writing things down can really be your friend with this stuff. So depending on the situation, sometimes I advise clients to jot down ideas somewhere, like a notebook or a spreadsheet, or just putting Post-its on, a wall somewhere. Without editing them, without like kicking the tires on it, right? Just write it down and add it to the list, and consciously decide that you are going to really examine it in detail till later. Sometimes I'll have a client who absolutely can't go to bed that night without writing down like the but what if thoughts. And so for those people, I say, keep a separate list of that, keep a separate column or sheet in the spreadsheet for that. That way, you captured it somewhere, but you're not looking at it all the time. And then, some other things are take note of those like frequently recurring guest gremlins, right? What is it that they're usually saying to you? And that way you can come up with some, I call them database responses, right? To those guys, so that you're, sometimes I call it heckling, not so much gremlins, but like that voice in your head kind of heckling you, so that you can have a super short summary of that database response. Like one of my frequent ones, will tell me that, nobody's going to want to talk to me, or nobody's going to trust what I'm saying. And I'll say, my response to that is just, oh, really? Because, I have all these examples, but I don't go into all the examples anymore because I don't need to. I've been talking to this gremlin for so long with heckler. So I just have an abbreviated response now. So anyway, those are some of the things that I would advise. Maybe that'll be useful to your listeners.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. A few of the things you said. So one again is listening to the body, right, and the energy of the body, which I think is super interesting. Is again, it's going back to like that. Like you get that rise of like, oh, I really want to do this.
Yeah.
And then, but
yeah, and it's a real thing.
Yeah. And then the other thing I really liked you said was that, again, the writing down piece, right? Where it's like when we write things down, I feel like we go into a deeper part of our like subconscious that, especially if you're saying like your free flow writing, I think that's like such a great idea because you write unfiltered, right? Because like even like when we try to write, we're always thinking like, oh, should I say like this, should I like this? But if you just let it free flow, you get like the real subconscious stuff drudging up. Like I think that's such a great concept. And then the other thing that you mentioned was like having like those like database responses, right? I think that's such a great
Yes.
idea too. Just because like there is a lot of times where you'll get that constant like the shadow self, right? Saying like, oh yeah, exactly. And it's like, hey, I know how to talk to you. Here, listen to the like that's such a good idea. And it's interesting too because like it's not that like shadow self like gremlin is trying to hurt us. It's just an overprotective like thing, right? It's like, oh, you really shouldn't do that because of this and that, and like it's
Yeah.
trying to protect you, but it's like being like a hover parent, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's like, oh,
Yeah.
because if you listen to that, you'll never do anything, right? Like if you had like it's the same thing as if you had
Exactly.
a super overprotective parent, like, oh, you can't go driving or you can't do, then you'll never do
Hmm.
anything. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
like that's such a great like concept.
It's so true. And it's so true what you said about how it starts from a place of like a positive place. It just takes itself too far in the other direction. And now it's become something you almost have to protect yourself from, right? You have to
Yeah,
kind of arm yourself with these little tools to try to make sure you're, fending it off.
that's awesome. Um, so what would you say is your current quest in life, and what motivates you these days to continue towards that quest?
Yeah, I had to think about this one for a little while, but then I realized the answer was kind of staring me right in my face. And it's growing my coaching business is my current quest. And I have tons of little mini quests associated with that, like kind of getting my name out there or getting my website, in better shape or, this and that. In fact, speaking on your podcast today is helping me with one of those mini quests. So thanks for having me on here.
Of course.
Um, and what motivates me, it's a lot of things. So I came up with several that I feel like are the top ones, and one of them is I love helping clients. When I am able to help a client, it just lights me up and energizes me so much. Like I was saying earlier, when somebody comes into a session and they're just feeling kind of like uncertain and not fit about themselves, and they leave energized and excited and ready to like take a big step into the future, that just makes me incredibly happy and makes me feel like I'm doing something that I love, right? Uh, and another one is it's so satisfying to see something that I am kind of building by myself, to see my business kind of growing from nothing, right, into a real thing that's
Yeah.
actually a real thing. It's a lot of work to do all the like admin and the marketing and the this and the that, but it's also fun and rewarding and interesting. And yeah, so there's that. And then I think the last thing, and I wasn't sure how I would feel about this part, but it's turned out to be great. After working for other people all these years, like executing on their visions, right, their ideas, it's been fantastic to be executing on my own vision and my own plans. It turned out I wasn't sure if I would have lots of ideas. I have tons of ideas. I am very decisive when it comes to what I want to do. Um, I don't have to check with anyone. I don't have to ask anyone, run anything by anyone. Yeah. So I love that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I feel like there's something special about like building something out of nothing, right? Like, and
Yeah.
even then though, if you think about it, it's like you are still building on like the efforts of other people. Like at the end of the day, even
Oh,
you know what I
yeah.
mean. Like even if you think you're on your own, you're really not, because like you
Mm-mm.
get so much advice and like just tools and all these things
The
that help
tools I
you.
use, I thought of the tools I used when you said that, because there are so many apps and systems that were built by other people. And as someone starting out, some of them are available like as free trials or free up to a certain number of people. So these low cost or lower cost tools have been so essential because I'm not a big enterprise firm. So yeah, having stuff like that can help me with like, especially the marketing stuff, like that's been huge, really important. So yeah, I definitely built on it's a village, right? It
Yep.
takes a village of people, and
Yeah.
having a supportive coaching community has been major too. Like folks like you that are so welcoming and so supportive. I mean, yeah, it's a coaches are like no other group that I've encountered. They're just so fantastic, and I love it.
That's awesome. Uh, So do you have any last tips and tricks to share with the audience?
I would just reiterate that dealing with those negative voices, that is, you really do have to figure out how you're going to do that. I mean, I provided a couple of things that worked for me and have worked for clients I've worked with, but you do really have to nail that because they are going to pop up, especially as you get out of your comfort zone more and more. So I would just say to people, this is a serious key to your success or your not success as you go forward. So, take it seriously. And then the other thing, don't be a bystander in your career. It's your career. Nobody else is going to care about it as much as you do. And nobody else is going to look out for it the way you will.
Yeah, I think that's a very super important point because a lot of times you're in a career and you feel like almost like it's just next step, right? And then
Right, right. You're going down the path that you think you should go down,
right,
or that somebody's kind of leading you down or encouraging you to go down because they want you to get this job or they want you to get promoted because they need someone given that spot. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's awesome. Where can people find you?
Oh, they can find me on my website at rachelgaddiscoaching.com, which is just recently up. Or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Rachel Gaddis on LinkedIn. I'm also on Facebook at Rachel Gaddis. So, but I would say the number one spot is my website right now, rachelgaddiscoaching.com.
Awesome, and then we'll have the links in the description, everybody. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you. This was a pleasure.
Awesome.